Yeah, so thanks again. And I was looking at the participants. We have a lot of participants today, which is great. There's a good amount of people here. And as you said, lady, we were going to talk, or we are going to talk today about infrastructure automation, and I'm really going to talk about it within the context of essentially the storage perspective, right? What does it mean for the storage or enterprise storage management? And thus, you see the title of the presentations, like the evolution of enterprise storage management. So that's kind of the sense here, right? And just as a matter of reintroducing myself, as you said, my name is Eduardo Rivera. I worked in NetApp IT, and within NetApp IT, I manage what we call the Customer One, the long name Customer One Solutions Group, which is really, yes, we are the storage team, but we're also the team that are managing and deploying all sorts of NetApp technology internal to NetApp IT to manage our business. And today's topic is something is fairly popular these days, and I find myself talking to a lot of customers about it. We've done many different types of interactions around this topic and related items, and it's something that within NetApp IT we have gone through, or I guess I'll say we're going through, and is over the past year or years, and it's affecting a lot of our enterprise customers. And I want to talking about is really the evolution or the evolving trends within storage management with regards to automation and the modernization of the enterprise. So my intent today is to share with you our NetApp IT experience and perspective. And as I go through this presentation, I want the folks on the call to really think about, their customers, the environments that they work with, and try to see how are their customers and their environments thinking about these changes? How are these changes manifesting in those environments? And perhaps at what stage or through that journey are all those customers sitting? And how can we help them kind of get through them, right? And to a large degree, how maybe you can draw some similarities between what you have observed and what we'll talk about today in that IT. And by the end of the presentation, I wanted to walk away with a perspective of what it takes, or what has taken us at least to transform. And again, it's always a work in progress. We transform into a more modern enterprise automation, storage management and infrastructure team, which is what we do today. Now, as Lee said, please, you can throw your questions in the chat as we go through this. I'll even encourage you to speak up if you have a question. I don't have a ton of slides. I'll be happy to take my time and talk about particular items. But please, as the more interactive we can make it, the better for me. All right, and Lady and Dee, if you guys see any questions, also interrupt me and let me know.
Sure.
All right, well let's get started. Let me just roll here to the next slide. As a general view, and you may have seen a slide like this before in other presentations we've done, but I like to put it here for perspective. We are the corporate NetApp IT team, right? We manage the infrastructure for what we call the enterprise side. So everything that has to do with corporate applications that you may use to do your day-to-day job, everything from the Microsoft 365 that you use to a Quotage to ERP, all those applications that run the business, we run the infrastructure behind that to make those work, right? So that is across multiple data centers, across multiple world sites, large footprint of storage, compute, networking, both on-prem, off-prem, and I'll say everything in between, right? All the things are connected. And because we are in that position, that's what we call ourselves customer one, because we're the first consumer of all this technology that the NetApp creates. And we do it on purpose, right? For the purpose of A, running the business, but B, also being a frame of reference for customers or the product team, so we can provide back feedback of what works, what doesn't work, experience, etc. So we play a big role also on this, I'll say, voice of the customer, if you will, right? With product teams or other customers as well. So we have again, sort of like a dual role here. Keep the lights running, also provide some feedback and some customer perspective when it comes to the technologies that we deploy in our environment. And to that point, this is a sort of like a 10,000 foot view of the things that my team handles, right? So just to give you some perspective, we have a lot of things in our hands. It wasn't that long ago that the only thing that we cared about was ONTAP, right? And ONTAP is still certainly the biggest chunk of our infrastructure. But now we have so many other things that we need to care about. And it's not just NetApp technology, or it's things around that technology, right? So we certainly have our staples like ONTAP, storage grid, HCI, et cetera. But we also now have a lot of tools that are branded that we have to take care of and deploy and manage, as well as a lot of, I'll say, soft initiatives and programs that we have been building up, which we're going to talk about automation today. But a lot of programs that we're building up to get our arms around what's going on within the infrastructure. And then that leads to the consumption of new technologies, developing technologies, as well as which is tricky for, I'll say, my team and others that have been on doing the one job for a long time, leads to the need to learn some additional, or I'm going to call ancillary expertise, which is all these other technologies that touch upon the storage infrastructure. And there are, you know, some of these are very common these days across all the technology landscapes that you guys work with. So as we evolve as a team and we have more things to manage, right? We have a lot of, I'll say, balls in the air that we had to juggle. So we have a large portfolio of technology that we manage, which is important to consider, right? When we're talking about, why automation is important and why we necessitate some sort of transformation, sort of new view as we move forward. Now, with that in mind, here's a reality, right? In our IT infrastructure, the expectation from the consumers, and I'll define consumers today as those that are coming to us, the infrastructure team, asking for resources of some kind, VMs, applications, etc., is that everything is delivered as a service, right? And at the same time that we have delivering things as a service, they want it to be either on-prem, off-prem, it's kind of repeating that experience that you may have when you're just consuming things out of your phone, right? So we have this need for things to be, immediately available, so rapid application deployment that is self-service, that is there when they need it, and that, again, location doesn't matter, right? So we put all these things together. We have from an infrastructure perspective, we have things like what we call hybrid cloud, private cloud, which is nothing than deploying resources on-prem and off-prem and made them all work together. We have practices, or I'll say administrative practices like DevOps, which I won't get a lot into today, but it's a big buzzword these days, right? But it's about the ability to develop and operate these environments on an ongoing basis. And of course, all the enterprise IT components that we bring forth as I'll say, a older enterprise organization that have big data centers to manage. So at the end, the expectation today is that storage, particularly storage, along with compute and network and whatnot, is delivered as a service, whether that is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, container as a service. Those different consumables from the end users include some aspect of storage, and it just comes with it. And you think about that for a second, that's a big difference, right, from what we have done or what traditional enterprise storage managers have faced, the 15, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago for that matter, right? We were used to have the storage team that creates volumes, hands it over to some DBA, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like a slower process, more control. I mean, there's always needs to have control and visibility, but that also slows things down. So now that is at odds with what's being requested or what is being expected from us. So considering that, what is the impact on the storage infrastructure? Well, the first thing is that we need to rethink how we are delivering storage. Again, that hand holding and that hand delivery of those resources is not really meeting the need, right? So we need to kind of think about how are we going to change that and how we're going to improve that to meet this new demand. And number two is that the engineer itself, right, probably finds themselves in a pickle where they're not really feeling equipped, right, to work with this new reality. But it's something that we can work with, right? It's just something to recognize up front. It's like we have to understand how to deliver storage differently, and we need to understand how to evolve our engineers to work within this new reality. And the reality here is that there are changes in the enterprise storage, right? We have to serve a new consumer type. I mentioned a few minutes ago the fact that we have, DBAs or another worked in the past, and those still there, right? But then this new consumer type, which we'll talk about in a second, is that user or perhaps a platform that is automating and consuming storage on demand and on a self-service manner. And on the other side is that we as engineers have to adopt these new skills. And think about that in the context of your customers you work with, right? They may, as we have new products that we're putting out there, we are trying to empower the application teams
Hi.
directly. Oh, so somebody has a question.
Hello.
I think that was just noise in the call. So as you talk to your customers out there, just imagine that we are deploying technologies that are empowering the applications to self-serve and to some degree bypass some of these traditional storage admins. But the reality is that the storage admins still have a very real role to play. They just have to grow their skill set and to be able to talk the level of this new application developers and consumers of our technology. So we'll talk about that too. So talking about the new consumer, right? So what do we mean there? What I mean by that, and this is again our NetApp IT infrastructure, and I talked a little about this past slides, is that we are in a position where the demand really is coming in in a self-service, simplified experience, if you will, for the end user. And what I may, but let's define that a little bit better. What I mean by self-service is that they are wanting to consume storage services either through a user portal, something like perhaps ServiceNow or something that they might have developed themselves, but something that is not necessarily logging onto the filer and creating your volume, is logging onto some service portal that has a catalog item that you can access and just ask for a simple request. And also through an API interface, something that I can program against and just create things as needed. That's what we mean by self-service. At the same time, while the storage infrastructure underneath is not necessarily any simpler, right? We still have to manage all the things that we manage every day and think about performance and capacity and different types of hardware. The end consumer wants less and less to do with those choices. At least even if they don't recognize it, I think they do, because what they want is simplicity, right? They want to be able to say, I just want file, I just want object, I just want it to work, right? And I want to get this much of that, and I want it to work at this performance tier. And this is a conversation that has been happening now for years, right? So trying to simplify not necessarily the storage uh, device itself, although there's some of that too, but it's really simplify the choices to the user. And it's something that it's part of this collective system of developing services as a service, right? And from an administrative perspective, right, we're not, at the same time we're doing these things, we're not really wanting to provide direct access to the infrastructure, right? Meaning that the particular users, and again, it's not logging onto a file and to grab their own volumes, but they're doing so through some automated platform or some orchestrator. That means that they're either logging to ServiceNow, or they're deploying applications through Kubernetes, or perhaps even OpenStack or some other orchestrator that is on behalf of that user, talking to the underlying infrastructure and creating all this volumes and systems and whatnot automatically, right? And for the most part, the infrastructure team on these tasks is hands off, meaning that in the creation of new volumes, specifically on ONTAP, you wouldn't be doing it by hand. You kind of hands off and you allow the automation to work its magic. You still have other things to consider, but you're trying to relieve the storage administrator from some of these so more remedial tasks and have them worry more about the bigger picture. So what does that bigger picture look like? Let me show you an example. From an oh, all right, sorry, I think there was some noise annoying. So from a NetApp IT perspective, what does a bigger picture looks like? It looks something like this, right? And this is obviously simplified, but I'll try to walk you through it because this is important to understand, why, how are we approaching this? When I talk about the self-service portal, and in our case, we're talking about ServiceNow because that's what we use. NetApp IT doesn't have to be that, but that's what we use. And as a user, you could go in and create a request through a predetermined service catalog that updates a CMDB as you go through that. And then the magic starts to happen, right? A call is made, in this case, to our Ansible Tower infrastructure, under which is a lot of Ansible playbooks that deploy not only storage, but many other components of the environment. And as it does all this thing behind the scenes, it creates either VMs in HCI, it creates volumes on IFF or buckets on storage grid. It does all these things behind the scenes without the user really understanding what's happening. But then at the end, delivering back to the user, hey, here's your stack, here's your your bucket, here's your VM, here's the stuff that you requested, and you don't need to worry about the complexity. Now, in this execution, again, the administrator in this point of time is hands off, right? The work was done beforehand, right? Building the infrastructure, building the automation that makes it happen, but the creation of that kind of stuff is already, I'll say defined through the automation and safeguarded and controlled that way. So again, we're delivering simple solutions from a, I'll say somewhat complicated environment, but because it has to be to provide services through a mostly hands-off approach. So that's what we're talking about when I say that we need to look at the new consumer, the way that the platform is consuming storage, and where do we fit, right, within that construct. Now, to I guess elaborate on that point, I want to take a deeper look into this new consumer, right? So when we look at the storage or the automated platform, right, it look at something like this. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it's a lot, but I'll explain briefly what we're looking at. This is a depiction of our NetApp IT, what we call Cloud One DevOps as a service solution. It's really a way for a developer to request a development environment that is comprised of containers that have a life in AWS, and they also may have a life on-prem, depending on how we deploy. And if you follow the arrows, you see that it goes everything from creating the source code, committing it to some certain tools, going through some analysis, creating containers, evaluating changes, and eventually deploying to production, right? And that production in this case ends up being in our on-prem systems. Now, when you look at this picture, it looks very broad and to something very complicated, and it's hard to see. So where's the storage, right? What is the role that we're playing here as a enterprise storage team? And the reality is, it's all throughout. There's pieces of it all throughout this picture, and this is where again we talk about the evolution of management and where automation really comes into play. We have Cloud Volumes Service in AWS in this case, perhaps even CVO in the future. We had the administration of creation and attachment on this storage volumes through Trident, which is automatic and pre-configured. We have Ansible playbooks creating stuff in storage grid, Ansible playbooks creating VMs in HCI. And again, going back to on-prem, creating more volumes through our Trident implementation on-prem. So the solution stack here from NetApp is not necessarily the end all be all. It's really an engine that powers the rest of this this pipeline. So you can see hopefully how this is it starts to become perhaps a little more complicated, difficult to absorb if you're a more traditional storage administration team. And this is where I think some of the rub happens, right? We need to understand how to service and how to look at this environment. So that leads straight to the need for automation, right? So what I presented so far is that it leads to almost these three pillars, I'll say, right? We have to deliver the storage at the speed of code. And what I mean by that is, again, that we can be doing handheld creation of volumes, et cetera. And this is a skill that has to be developed, right? We need to integrate with the existing platforms. And integration means I'm going to be able to create volumes or objects or whatever at the storage layer through automation that is called by something like ServiceNow or through Kubernetes or some other orchestrator. And finally, it also means, and this especially is important for us in NetApp IT, is as we move forward, we don't want to continue to rely on standards, especially on the storage side, that are written on a document somewhere. That still exists to some degree, but we don't want to have a whole bunch of documented standards that somebody has to manually read and apply. We want to be able to define those standards through code, meaning that in that same automation that we're creating to create objects, we're also creating automation that enforces certain parameters and standards, so to speak. Now, To give you a quick example, when you deploy an SVM, for instance, there's a lot of different you know options you can set and whatnot. Well, let's say that you care about the volume recovery queue, the VRQ, some one option within the SVN that allows you to recover volumes after deletion. Well, that has a setting of how many hours you want to a volume to exist before it's permanently deleted. Well, we had a standard, and that standard was set in code through an Ansible playbook. And as soon as we turn it on, it sets it up across the entire environment. If we ever had to change a standard, we just go change it in code. And next time that it executes the playbook, it just applies a new standard. So just like that, we intend to continue to log and catalog all of our standards into the code that is maintained in the environment, and therefore not having to create wiki pages and whatnot that nobody reads. So when you put all these things together, right, we really have the need to do delivery through code, integration through code, and standards through code. And you can see how now automation becomes a central part of the storage administrator's skill set or need. And as you talk about the storage engineer itself, right, we have a little bit of a conundrum, or perhaps a little bit of a fear from a lot of storage administrators, especially those being around for a while. And it's like, well, how do I do this? Does it mean like everything I know is useless? Like I'm not doing storage anymore? That's not true. The reality is that storage skills are still very much needed. I'll say that I am vehemently against this idea that there's an IT generalist can do everything. I think that's a fallacy. I think you still have a whole bunch of specialists that just added more knowledge to the repertoire, right? You still need somebody that understands how deploy and manage and configure storage devices. But then that person also needs to elevate those skills and augment with this new because of this new reality, right? So we need not only to know the storage that we deploy, but we need a complete stack knowledge. That's not to say that you have to be an expert, let's say in Kubernetes, right? But you need to know enough about it to understand where does the storage plug in and how does it plug in. The same way that 10, 15 years ago, storage administrators were very close to Oracle DBAs, right? They understood the database very well because that was the primary customer. Today, we need to understand these automation stacks better, so we are able to cater to them and build for them. And we need to really talk and walk in code. Now, again, this is not meaning that we have to be, application developers building, complex, Java applications or whatever, for other code you may be using. It just means that we need to be able to do simple things through code and more advanced things as best as we can through code. And it means that we have to pick up a few skills. Maybe we do have to learn a little bit more Ansible, maybe a little more Python, maybe other codes. And with that, it's not just knowing how to create the code, but it's how to organize it and make it useful and act a little bit like, I'll say, a development team. But again, with the focus of really infrastructure management. So there's a lot of expectations for an engineer, but again, it's something that through a directed approach, or organized approach, we at NetApp IT have been able to, to attain. And again, it's always a work in progress. I'll show you what that looks like, but it's a reality that we have to accept and kind of go through.
Eduardo,
Mm-hmm.
we have a question on chat. Is the service available through channel or only direct? As far as I see, it is a consumer go. It is the consumer goes directly to the platform. What does the channel contribute in this?
So I think what the channel needs to understand. I mean, when you say channel, I mean the partners on the call, correct?
I believe so. Yes, I want to believe it's a partner, but
Okay,
she.
okay. So I think what the partners need to remember is like we're not we're trying to empower the customer. If I go back a few slides, let me just kind of go back a few
No,
slides.
distributors and partners.
I'm sorry.
Distributors and partners, she said.
Right. So what I'm talking about here is that so as I said, I guess I'm trying to think about the question. When we look at the NetApp technology, right? So I represent NetApp. So we want to sell NetApp device and NetApp technology, and partners you resell them. But as partners, you're also reselling a lot of these other technologies. And I think I presume that some of your your customers may be trying to figure out how to put it all together and deliver solutions internal to the customer, right? This is the customer trying to build their own internal solutions for whoever is consuming their resources. And the consumers are not people on the internet. The consumers are the application team, right? Or interact with the infrastructure team. So I think as partners, the importance here is to really try to help our customers get to the point where they are comfortable with various technologies, integration points, and be able to deliver these solutions internally. Uh, that's not to say, I don't know everybody's background here. Maybe somebody here is doing hosted services or something of the like. And if you are, then you will be the person building this stuff in your environment to service your own external customers. Hopefully that answers the question. I'll be happy to elaborate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Let me just go move forward here. All right. So again, thinking about, and let's think about in the context of what we just talked about the administrator and the role of the partners here. There is actually a lot of I'll say a lot of opportunity here for education, perhaps even additional services and whatnot that you can do with your different customers to really help them build these additional skills. I think that not only will they be individually also encouraged by learning new stuff, but they will actually be much more successful and therefore hopefully much more rewarding to the partner in the sense of like future business and future collaboration, because we're trying to help the customer understand this transition, not fear it, but embrace it and go ahead and get to the next level, which again is not just technology, it's also knowledge. But the more knowledge and more probably technology in the consumer in the long run. So when it comes down to the administrator, right? How do we what do we look at, right? We need to identify skills, or the customers need to identify skills that are outside of just storage. Uh, I think that's obvious at this point, right? So we need to understand the related infrastructure. And if you're a partner that are delivering other components of the ecosystem, there's a great opportunity to go and talk about, hey, let me talk to you about how this integrates with XYZ. That is also part of the catalog, that the things we bring to customers, right? We want to encourage customers to have cross-functional work. This is easier said than done. If you I I'm willing to bet that if you talk to the larger the organization, the more established and perhaps older organizations have the toughest time with this, right? We have a lot of silos, and when you're going to go talk to a storage manager, they have no clue what may they have separate automation team, may have separate server team, separate application team. They're all big silos, right? And that creates problems, not just for you in terms of interacting with the customer as a potential deal in the future, because you're trying to sell things that perhaps one side doesn't understand versus the other, but it creates a problem for them too. And for us internal to IT, the problem is that we need to be able to understand, again, thinking about the complete stack, what are our neighbors in the infrastructure doing, so we can be at the same level and then build solutions that integrate together. And of course, there's a lot of new technology in NetApp, and I can rattle through some of them, right? We have new API solutions in ONTAP itself, right? We have all the things that are going through Cloud Manager, like CVO, and so Cloud Manager itself has an API. We have Cloud Compliance, Cloud Secure. All these things can play a role in this bigger ecosystem. It's a matter of like understanding how they stitch together and how do they work together to deliver what you want. And the answer is not going to be most likely copy and paste for everyone. It's going to be specific to what the situation is at hand. And as managers, if you talk to the managers of the infrastructure teams, again, they also need encouragement and I think support, right, to understand the importance of building this ancillary skill set to help the engineers move forward and their teams move forward. And when we look at I'll say the skill set that we have been building within my team, again, and to use some perspective, I want to say the most junior person in my team has probably been doing storage for at least 9-10 years. So they're all traditional storage administrators. So this is again hard for us. We have been working on building, I'll say we're always work in progress type of skill set tree where we're trying to branch out. And these technologies, a lot of them are just open source, but they also touch upon solutions again that you may be trying to position at your customers. And without the knowledge, I think that will be unsuccessful. So when we are thinking as a team to build our own technology knowledge, I'll say, this is what we've come up so far. And I'm not gonna go through the whole list, but you can see I've tried to build some sort of progressive skill tree where we are really tackling automation first by learning things like, simple things like Git. Azure DevOps is another tool that we use to do a lot of the management of a code. Ansible, which is front and center today. And if you're not aware, right, there's extensive Ansible modules for everything on tap. We have even modules for storage grid and SolidFire. So a lot of automation going through that these days. And of course, a lot of learning in the public cloud across all different hyperscalers. And what we're trying to do is based on that, I'll say level one, we're trying to build on top of that and build proficiency. And again, the more we get to, I'll say the right hand of this chart, the more educated, the more skilled we are at tackling automation problems and automation solutions as we move forward. So it's always a work in progress. Now, considering that we have, we talked a little bit about the new consumer, we talked a little bit about the new skill set. At this point, we're really kind of talking about recognizing what customers probably are going through and what they need to think through as they're trying to evolve their practices. And now maybe you're in a position where you can talk about automation, because I think with the mistake that we do, or a lot of customers do, we did it as well. It's like try to put the cart before the horse. Now let's talk about deploying scripts. Before you do that, you kind of have to go through some understanding on why we're doing this and where are we heading, and that's hopefully what we've just done. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the automation program that we built in Customer One. And like every program, it starts with a big statement. Again, from a traditional enterprise management perspective, we're moving to a place where we are aiming to have a program that drives a perpetual effort to define all storage infrastructure deployment, configuration, operational tasks via code, which is kind of what I said a few slides ago. We're really trying to move toward this goal, and this is a never-ending goal, right? We will continue to iterate and reiterate to build that pipeline and that administration. Now, when you look at the components, this is kind of how we defined it. And I think this is, again, where customers can certainly use some help from their partners to try to organize their thoughts. And in between, there's certainly consultation, there's probably products and whatnot, but it really comes down to organizing your thoughts about how are you going to tackle as an infrastructure team the automation of your infrastructure. So we define scope. In this case, we're talking about automating infrastructure. We started with ONTAP, right? So we were defining things within the ONTAP ecosystem. We're identifying platform tools and processes, which are, I'll give you an example in a second, but it's really about what tools do we need to learn, like Git or Ansible or whatnot, to be able to be successful. Then development some processes about how do we take an idea of something that we want to do to something that is actually created and maintained. And of course, we talked about the skill gap. We identify a skill gap through the engineers. Not everybody's on the same page, but we are trying to guide them through that and try to keep them keep them educated and interested. And of course, ultimately, it's operationalize, which is putting it all together and making it work on a recurring basis. So we look at the components a little bit deeper, right? We talked about tools and whatnot. Here are the things that we thought about, right? We thought that first and foremost, we thought about where do we store our code? Where do we store the things that we create? And that the examples of that will be things like Git. We use a lot of Azure DevOps, which has a Git repository within it. But we also think about, well, okay, well, development platform. Do we develop in Perl, PowerShell, etc.? And the answer is that it doesn't really matter, right? You just kind of have to feel where your skill set is and what is most appropriate for the job and go down that path, right? There's no real restrictions, but there's some thought that needs to be put in there based on the skill set and what you want to accomplish. And then more advanced topics in the journey of automation for us was orchestration and deployment. Like we create the code, we upload it to a repository. How do we deploy it and how do we maintain it? And that, again, there's different tools for it. we again we're using a lot of Azure DevOps to do that, but the sort of tools like Jenkins and whatnot that manage how code is deployed to the systems that need it. And this is certainly not last, but it's part of the thought process. Is like once you created something, it has a life, right? It has this version 1.0 feeling that you're gonna have to go back and fix things or improve and whatnot. So you have to also think as a development team, how do you absorb requests for features or bugs and whatnot? And that's another thing that we need to consider when we're thinking about the program. When we think about the roles and responsibilities within my team, and again, think about the customers you guys interact with. You're trying to promote, you're trying to help them get to that automation next step. It also requires support internally, right? So we define roles within our organization to try to build this program to make this run successful. And that starts with myself, the storage manager. I'm the one trying to carry the flag, talk about it, make sure that we had the right budget and whatnot. We have project managers that are involved, helping our engineers organize their work. We have within the team identified what I'm going to call an automation lead, a person that is more versed than the others in coding, and it serves as a sort of like a mentor and a helper in defining standards and gaps and doing some code review. But at the same time, not be a bottleneck, not be in the way, just kind of help move things along. And of course, at the end, it's all the engineers, right? The engineers, as I mentioned, they have different levels of skill, and we have to support them to provide them the resources and the managerial support to spend time on doing this thing and going and creating all these solutions. When you look at the operationalization, I'll say, a big part of it is creating this pipeline. This pipeline, which actually comes out of this, is how we do it today, right? We have created a process under which we try to formalize the generation of ideas. We discuss it through an envisioning process, which is really more of a review, right? Evaluate feasibility. It's reviewed with the lead, and then this development time that happens, and there's a release. And the release, before something released, there's standards around like, yeah, you should have some documentation, you should have some, we call TOIs, a transfer of information. You should have a, a short presentation of what it's doing, so make sure that people understand. And the release is not the end of the line. The release is the end of that particular version, right? So I mentioned earlier that we have to have a way for us to address bugs and address feature requests and whatnot. So this pipeline, as we created, it helps us organize those thoughts, but also organize the ongoing maintenance of anything that we create. And again, this is really about trying to teach infrastructure team to be more of a development team, not taking away the infrastructure part, but just adding to it some new skills. And as lessons learned, right? As we look at what we did and some of the things that we talk about, if I summarize some of the stuff that we just covered, as we build our infrastructure program, these are things that maybe are interest to your customers, right? And put it very plainly, the first thing that we had to deal with is learning how to speak the language, right? I mentioned things like Git, Ansible, Kubernetes, etc. I'm sure a lot of you are very well versed what those things are, but not everybody is. We weren't. So we really had to spend some time learning, like, what do the things even mean, right? How do they put together? How do they work before we can even learn how to actually use them? So we spent some time early on trying to define what's what, right? And how are those other teams leveraging this technologies? And then the next big step, which we talked about a little bit, was really defining this repository where we create code and we save code. The reality is that throughout time, people have always written scripts. There's somebody's laptop and some shared drive and whatnot. That's not really that good for today's demands, right? We can build consistent infrastructure automation with somebody's home directory scripts. We have to have a versioning control, a place where people, single source of truth, if you will, where things are sitting. And then, of course, as we venture into creating the tools and the automation, we try to focus on small immediate needs, right? Let's start small. Let's build, solutions that we need based on what we have in our hands. Meaning that it's very easy to get boggled down by boiling the ocean, saying like, I want to automate everything. I want to automate everything we do, which we do. But if you start with that premise, you're probably not going to get anywhere, right? You have to say, hey, I want to automate the creation of an SVM. That's all I want to do right now, because that's important to us, and that's something that we do often. So scope small and start small, and then you iterate from there. And of course, as we just discussed, we had to build a pipeline, right? As we create all these pieces of code, there needs to be a way to organize the effort and to iterate through these efforts, right? And again, it's okay to create what we're going to call a version 1.0, or sometimes we call it MVP, minimum viable product. It's okay to create something small that does something very directed and it's not super robust. That's okay, because we're going to iterate over time. The idea is that these things have a life of their own, right? So it's an ongoing journey, if you will, right, to go through this. And I believe that many of your customers probably going through a similar evolution. And it's, again, for us, it's been big lessons learned. It's not something that has gone overnight. It's something that we've done over the past, I'll say at this point, 2.5 years to get to where we are today. So from a team perspective, where do we go from here, right? So we have a program. We have identified skills. We have identified where do we want to go with this. We still have a big chunk of what we're going to call traditional infrastructure that we do manage. But as we move forward, a lot of the new deployments, a lot of the new applications are being built with that new as a service model. So as we move forward, we're going to continue to deliver more as a service experiences, right? More catalog items through things like ServiceNow, more integration with Ansible, uh, Python, etc. We will continue to promote the automation message, not just in a forum like this. It's really more about internally. And I think as you talk to your customers and work with your customers, this is a role that you guys can also play. You want to promote the message of automation because it's going to happen anyways, right? And somebody who's not looking down this road and working on this is going to be left behind, right? And you want to be able to empower your customers to to get with the program, if you will, right? Which includes training of engineers in strategic areas, right? Growing that knowledge. And as a team of engineers internal to us, we'll continue to grow and maintain that pipeline that we just talked about, right? That is always a work in progress. That is a hard thing to do, especially because we're not a development team. So we will continue to do that. And of course, as we move forward, it's I would say an attitude of code first, if you can. If there's anything we need to do, I will say more than once, but even if it's just once, we're probably going to try to think about doing that through code, because once you have it there, you can always use it in the future and update it. And again, define your standards through that code. So this is, again, our perspective on how we see it, how we are going to move forward. And at the end, what are the key takeaways? Hopefully, as you're thinking about this, I know this a lot of this talk is really more about an engineering team. How do they should think about their own automation strategy. But I think as partners that work directly with customers, I think it's important to recognize, right, that the landscape and expectations of those IT teams has changed, right? There still be some need for traditional, but there's a lot of need, whether by force or natural growth, to have this, automated consumer that we talked about, right? They need to recognize that these consumers have changed and are evolving and are part of an automated platform. That's an important thing to recognize and to bring to the table when we're talking to customers. And because of that, right, it's important that those teams that you're working with are embracing an infrastructure as code mentality. And again, there's a lot of opportunity there, not just for NetApp technology to be placed in those conversations, but all the things that are complementary and that are helping them build these solutions. And if there you have any opportunities to provide assistance through either training or I would say even staff augmentation, right, to help them build solutions, that's also something that is very much needed. We've gone through that, and we went through a lot of training. We even had third parties at NetApp IT helping us build some of the initial automated solutions. So there's a lot. I think there's a lot of value here, not just not just even talking to a direct customer or manager of storage, but also to somebody who works with those groups to help them bring more value within the infrastructure, and really at the end strengthening the partnerships that we make with those customers. And with that, I think I'm at the end of the presentation. We still have about 10 minutes left. So if any questions or any conversation you want to have, I'm happy to talk about it.